Hi everybody and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about multiplying and dividing rational expressions. So your goal after watching this video will be able to have some comfort and fluency, again, multiplying and dividing rational expressions. So to get started here, just a quick reminder for our vocab word. It's a little bit of review. I'm going to put it in here. This is actually going to be some fraction review. And we're going to need that because these rational expressions are fractions, and when we specifically get to division, we're going to need to know the steps for how to do that. So it might be from a few years ago. You might be familiar with keep, change, flip, or KCF. And all that this is, it's kind of a nice way to remember. It's not KFC like the chicken, but KCF, how to divide fractions. So when dividing fractions, we keep the first term exactly the same. We change the operation to multiplication, actually. And then finally, last, we flip the fraction. Or we flip the second term. And as always, a lot of words here, so I think the best way to kind of break this down is to let's actually see it. So let's say we have our first fraction is a over b, and we're dividing it by, let's say, c over d. Well, in this case, I'll annotate on top, we keep, we change, and we flip. And to be really specific, you can even draw these lines, and if it helps you to kind of like demarcate everything, that's what we do. So we keep exactly as it is, a over b, so we're not going to touch that. We change our sign, and again here in our notes it's saying change the operation to multiplication. So we're going to change this operation to multiplication. I should write that in my pen here. And then lastly, we flip. So our last fraction here, we have c over d. Well, we flip it to d over c. So whatever is on top is now on the bottom. Whatever was on the bottom is now on top. And now that we have this in multiplication form, we do what we know we can do here, which is just multiply straight across. So we'll have a times d on the top, and we'll have b times c on the bottom. And that'll be the final answer. So KCF, keep, change, flip. Keep that order correct in your head, and you'll be all set for anything with division. Again, remember for multiplication, we're just going straight across. So again, multiply the two tops, multiply the two bottoms, and that last step, if you're able to simplify any and everything that is possible. So we're going to go through an example here. So our first one is just multiplication, which means that we're going to go straight across. A couple things to point out here, thinking about simplifying. We know that we have some x's and y's on top, and we have some x's and y's on the bottom, so we know that those are likely going to cross out. A second thing that if you're looking closely, you might be able to see right away, and we'll go over how to do this if you don't see this, but we have an 8 on the top and a 16 on the bottom, so we know that that's going to divide in evenly, and we also have a 7 and a 21 that are going to divide in evenly. So maybe you'll be able to see that right away and be able to do that cancellation first step, which is great, but if not, we can still factor it just like we've been factoring. No harm, no foul to do that extra step. So first things first, on top here, just multiply our top terms here. So first 8 times 7 gets us 56, and then second, x and y squared are not like terms, so we just multiply them, basically write them next to each other. On the bottom, 21 times 16 is going to get us an answer of 336, and then we have, I should write these in order here, x to the third and y to the third as well. So that is the new step for today. That's today's skill, is doing the multiplication. We got to remember back to last week now, we do have to simplify these. So whenever you have these rational expressions, always need to simplify before you get to that final answer. Otherwise, you're basically, if you get to the ACT, SAT, you're not going to see your answer choice represented there because they're only going to have simplified answers to choose from. So that means that our work here is not done. We still have a little bit more to do. And we want to factor out these terms. So we can start with our numbers. So for example, 336, we want to factor that into its individual parts. Or we can do like we were doing with the square roots, how we would like draw those diagrams out, and we could see like, okay, if we do this, what times what gets us 336? So, for example, we could actually use 56 times 6. So 56 times 6 does equal 336. So we can actually write that out here, 56 times 6. And if you're like, Mr. R, why did you choose that one? Like, what is significant about that? Well, we actually have a 56 on top. And what that means is that these two things are going to cancel out. So that's actually a really good term to use. Secondly, we have our x and our y squared, or our 2y's on top. And on the bottom, we have x to the third, or 3x's, and y to the third, or 3y's. So again, we're just breaking these down into their individual parts. We could break the 56 down into, divided by 2 until you get to the most simple factors. But if you have anything that's in common right away, you can save yourself a little bit of time and say that, okay, I see that these two things are in common. We can simplify those based off of that. The same thing goes when we see x's in common. And the same thing goes if we see any y's in common, which we actually have 2 y's in common here. So final answer here, we more or less eliminated or canceled, simplified everything on top. So we're just left with 1. And on the bottom, we have a 6 left over. It looks like we have 2 x's left over, and we have a single y left over. So 6x squared y. And that's going to be our fully simplified answer. So to recap, again, that is the simplification. That's a review of last week. But doing the multiplication for that first step, that's the new stuff. That's today's basically objective. That's what you really want to get out of this video, is being able to multiply straight across. All right, next, going to move into, position this up here. We're going to be moving into some division. So just like we were talking about before, let's follow those steps of K, C, and F. And again, especially if you're new to this, it might do you some good to really kind of demarcate these things and really be clear about what is K, what is C, and what is F. So keep our first term exactly, change our operation, and then whatever's on the bottom is now on top. And whatever's on top is now on the bottom. And then now we just straight across multiply. So we have k minus 3 times k squared minus 4k plus 3. And then on the bottom, k plus 1 times k squared minus 1. And if we go back to last week's video, we can remember that when we're simplifying, sometimes we need to do some factoring. So k minus 3, that's great, that's fully factored. But here and here, these are both factorable if we break them out into 2x2 boxes. Before we jump into that though, a quick reminder, getting to this step where we're at right now, that's the division step, that's the new skill. So if you're able to do the KCF and then do that next multiplication step, you're in good shape for this video. The next stuff, again, review from last week. I want to make sure that we're still solid with those skills. So again, put this in your 2x2 box. We have our first term, we have our last term, and we want to use minus 3 and minus 1. Negative 3 times negative 1 is positive 3. Minus 3 minus 1 gets us to the negative 4 that we're looking for. So that simplifies that for us. Next, a little bit more of a challenging box here. The difference of squares, if you remember this. We're going to have k, and then plus 1 and minus 1. Because that gets us positive k, gets us negative k. Basically, those two cancel out, and we're just left with the k squared minus 1. So now, we can take those two boxes and rewrite everything. So k minus 3, and then on top, we have another k minus 3 and a k minus 1. And if you're like, where'd you get that from, Mr. R? Well, there's our k minus 3, there's our k minus 1, and that's where that came from right there. Next, rewriting that first term as k plus 1, and again, we have a k plus 1 on top, and then a k minus 1 on the side. And again, if you're like, Mr. R, where is this coming from? Here we go. Just basically accounting for everything as we go across. And then now, you can probably expect this, we have some things that are in common that we can simplify. And that's the whole reason why we did all this factoring. So we have a k minus 1 on the top and a k minus 1 on the bottom. And now we're left with 2 k minus 3s and 2 k plus 1s. And that's actually really nice for us because when we write it like this, we're going to be able to do even more simplifying. So k minus 3 squared on top, k plus 1 squared on the bottom. We can take the root of each of these. So again, we're doing the same operation to the top and the bottom. That's why we're allowed to do that. We're not changing this. We're just simplifying it further into our final answer of k minus 3 over k minus 1, or k plus 1, sorry. And that's it. So a lot of simplifying. But again, if you can get to this step right here, that's the new skill for today. Everything beyond this is just an application of what we did last week. So again, some good practice here, good review of last week's skills, and kind of building us up into that place of really getting comfortable working with these rational expressions. As always, any questions, feel free to reach out, book an appointment, any of those things. We are here to help and here to support. Please make sure that you complete the remaining 4 questions here on the side on that book widget. That way, again, you can get some extra practice, but get full credit for the assignment. See you in Teams soon, and as always, thanks for tuning in.